You're listening to the Shared Security Podcast, exploring the trust you put in people, apps, and technology, with your host, Tom Eston. In episode 105 for January 27th, 2020, Dark Web Fraud and Cybercrime with Emily Wilson from Terbium Labs. Business travel can be tough on our privacy as airports, airplanes, hotels, Ubers, and even other travelers can put our personal data at risk. That's why when I travel, I use a Silent Pocket Faraday bag for my laptop and smartphone so I can stay completely off the grid. Silent Pocket's line of patented Faraday bags are built to protect your digital privacy. Not only that, their products are well made and stylish too. You can receive 15% off your order right now at silentpocket.com. Use discount code SHAREDSECURITY at checkout to take advantage of this exclusive offer for listeners of this podcast. Joining me today to talk about fraud and cybercrime is Emily Wilson, VP of Research at Terbium Labs. Welcome to the show, Emily.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into researching fraud and cybercrime.
Sure, definitely. I'm not sure if there's a traditional path to becoming a dark web researcher, but in my case, at least, my background is actually in international relations. So not computer science, not technology, strictly speaking. Actually, a lot of my early research was on war crimes, primarily in Eastern Europe. And that sort of, after school led me to a few different projects. I ended up working as an independent consultant for several years with some international clients, trying to solve technology problems, trying to solve communication problems, and kind of the overlap of those two. And then I ended up joining Terbium about almost 5 years ago now as one of the first hires, trying to solve this, what ends up being sort of a technology problem and a communications problem, which is, we have this community online of criminals who are broadcasting to us how they're thinking about data, how they value data, how they're developing fraud because they have to broadcast that information to each other, right? This is an economy. This is a cybercrime economy. And so for me, it was just shifting from analysis of one type of community to another type of community. And of course, ended up getting back a little bit closer to Eastern Europe than I was anticipating.
Do you see a lot of the cybercrime now? I mean, I've known this for years, and I used to work at a bank in kind of their fraud and IT security department. And we always knew that Eastern Europe was the hotbed of criminal activity. I assume it's still the same?
There's certainly a prolific operation based in Eastern Europe and not just Russia, but a lot of former Soviet bloc countries as well. And then, of course, there's activity in the Middle East and Gulf states. There's interesting stuff coming out of East Asia. There's a lot of really interesting developing activity in South America. So I think we are seeing the growth of some of these global hotbeds, but certainly when it comes to fraud and things like payment cards, it's really hard to beat something like Eastern Europe.
Now, you recently wrote a great dark reading article about how the demand for marketing data will fuel complex fraud in the next decade. So how will criminals be leveraging this data, and why do you think this is more valuable to criminals than ever before?
There's a few different pieces here. One, which may sound obvious, but I think can't be overstated, is the more marketing data. And when I say marketing data, the things I'm thinking about here are social media profiles or purchasing histories or preferences that we set on certain sites, all of the things that are really useful for a given retailer or organization or tech giant to really tailor what they deliver to you, whether it's ads or content. In the hands of criminals, that kind of information is really good for targeted phishing, right? For going after whether groups of individuals or specific individuals. If you have a little bit more information about how they operate, or if you know that, for example, sending them a phishing email based on dogs instead of cats is more likely to get them to click, then being able to do that is going to be helpful for phishing. Aside from that, I think this same information in the hands of not just traditional kind of average cyber criminals, but also more sophisticated actors. Obviously, when we think about things like OPM data, that packs a little bit more of a punch, whether we're thinking about putting pressure on people, some sort of blackmail or some sort of more government-based operation. The more information that you have on a target, the better. whether you are looking to get information on them, if you're trying to groom someone for corporate espionage, there's a lot of potential there. The third piece is we're heading into an election year. I suppose we are in an election year now. It's 2020. This kind of information can be very useful for micro-targeting groups of individuals, whether that's for misinformation or disinformation campaigns, or even under certain regimes, where particular groups of people might be targeted for ethnic reasons or for their gender or sexual orientation. You can imagine the more information you have on a person, if you give that over to people who have a lot of resources at their disposal and can play around with this, you can imagine the fraud and cybercrime could scale up quite quickly.
And now a word from our sponsor, Edgewise Networks. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved are flat networks in cloud and data centers, with unprotected attack paths that allow threats to move laterally to cause data breaches. But microsegmentation using network addresses is complicated and takes too much time. But there's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation, delivering results immediately with a security outcome that's provable. At the core of Edgewise Auto Segmentation is Zero Trust Identity, which allows workloads to communicate only after their software identity has been verified. Malicious or unimproved software is no longer allowed to communicate. Identity-based protection provides more coverage with fewer policies to make Edgewise simple to deploy and manage. No changes to the application or network are required. One solution protects virtual machines and containers in the cloud and on-premises. To stop lateral threat movement and prevent breaches, visit edgewise.net for a demo and to see results within minutes. You had also talked about something called account access as a service. And you also talked about dark web operators offering booking services for travel and hospitality brands. Can you talk a little bit about this new form of fraud? And is this something that we should all be concerned with?
Sure. I think this is really interesting. One of the things in my community analysis approach to dark web research is, what are the new goods and services? How are things developing? How are they changing? How are they being marketed or remarketed? And with something like access as a service, what this looks like in practice is there's a couple different ways it manifests. Either people can pay to fraudulently have their legitimate accounts upgraded. So if you have, a standard airline account and you want to be, super gold, platinum, premium, you can opt in to have someone make that change for you so that you can then benefit from the access to that particular level or group or ranking. Or you can have someone book you similar luxury travel using their own third-party resources. And so in this case, perhaps you would pay someone 25% or 30% of the retail value of a flight or a hotel booking, and they offer to take care of that for you. Whether that's through a booking service that they're connected to, or perhaps they are integrated with the travel brands themselves. But this is being pitched as, you want that luxury, but you don't want to go through the hassle and the risk of committing the fraud yourself. So pay me a little bit extra. It'll still be less than you would pay to book it directly, and I'll take care of it for you. Vendors are actually marketing this as a safer alternative than using a stolen credit card because, based on their marketing tactics, they think that that's going to appeal to this fraud buyer audience.
Wow, that's fascinating. So have you seen a lot of instances just recently? Like when do you think the shift happened? Is it just like last year?
Being able to opt into status of some kind has been around for a while. It's popular in beauty brands, for example. I saw this begin to pop up a little bit more for travel brands over the last couple of years, and last year in particular. And I think it's interesting. It's something that I'm watching, I think, similar to the expansion of something like child data, or, some shifts in the way that phishing is handled online. I think it's really interesting to watch how this develops and how it might spread across different brands and what that means for those companies, for those travel or hospitality brands that are being targeted. I saw a similar thing with phishing, where it used to be that perhaps you would buy email addresses, big email lists to go off and kind of dragnet attempt to phish. Or maybe you would buy a guide on how to do phishing, and you would take that information and then take this guide and go execute your strategy. And now we see more developed goods and services where you can buy pre-formatted phishing pages with all of the malicious code already incorporated, all of the branding already incorporated for your financial institution or your tech company. It's much more plug and play. And so I think it's interesting to see how dark web vendors are developing these new goods and services and these new offerings to sort of remove some of the technical requirements and make it a little bit, kind of lower that barrier to entry for fraudsters who want to start to play around.
Yeah, and I think one of the most concerning topics you had mentioned is your research that you've done on child identity theft. What's being done about this issue, and what should those of us with kids do to combat this threat?
So first, in combating the threat, the best thing and really the only thing that we as individuals can do is, if you have children or if you know someone who has children, you can freeze children's credit. We as adults can also freeze our credit. But what a credit freeze does, which is a little bit different from some of the identity monitoring services that brands tend to favor after they've had a security incident. Identity monitoring services will let you know, or credit monitoring services will let you know once a new account has been opened with your information. Freezing your credit, on the other hand, stops criminals from opening those accounts in the first place. It puts a block on the account and says, this account is not looking to open anything new. If you receive any requests, you should deny them immediately. And that's important, right? Because as adults, at least we can keep an eye on our accounts. If we see something unusual, we can go and investigate it. But how many of us are thinking about the credit status of a 3-month-old? Criminals rely on that confusion. And they are using information on children, or perhaps even social security numbers that haven't been issued yet, people who haven't been born yet, haven't been identified yet, to go and open these credit accounts. And they're able to exploit them for decades, right? When's the first time that you check your credit status? You're buying your first car maybe, or you're going to school. And so one piece of this is just raising awareness and encouraging people to understand that children are appealing targets for cyber criminals, right? We think about physical safety for children, but we need to be thinking about their digital safety as well. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is coming around this year now, is that previously there was no system in place for financial institutions or credit agencies to check social security numbers against the Social Security Administration database and confirm that, one, the social has been issued, and that, two, that the social security number matches the contact information that's assigned to it. That is something that we would think would already exist, but it doesn't. But it's going to, starting this year, they're going to be piloting that program this year. And so I, for one, am very curious to see how many of these synthetic identity accounts we see appearing once banks are actually able to go and check on this information, and then how they handle it in the aftermath.
Yeah, good to see that they're doing that, because I can just imagine how big of a problem this is going to become.
It's a big issue, and it's a hard thing to deal with, because these credit profiles are tied to our social security numbers. And so the process of getting a new social issued is it's difficult at best and near impossible in many cases. There's one story that I talk about a lot with folks in the industry about a 6-year-old who had her information stolen, and the parents did everything they could to try and get her a new social, including changing her name, which was required by the Social Security Administration to get a new social security number issued. And how do you explain to a child that you have to change their name because someone got a hold of their information and used it to open a credit card at, J.C. Penney or something? How do you begin to have that conversation? And then how do you scale that kind of resolution as a financial institution or as the government agency? What do you do when you realize that there are millions of people who haven't even learned to write their names yet, who have had their information compromised? How do we deal with that?
Tough stuff for sure, but glad to see that you and others are helping to do something about it. So where can our listeners find out more about you and Terbium Labs?
Sure. So you can find out more about Terbium Labs by visiting, unsurprisingly, terbiumlabs.com. We work with customers to monitor their sensitive information online on the dark web. And as it's, criminals are beginning to spread across the open web and social media now. So we track data and alert companies when their information shows up so they can take action before, for example, that complex marketing data is used to phish their employees. And I am on LinkedIn, or you can find me on Twitter at 3rd Emily, if you're interested to see me ranting about child data exposure and lack of regulation in the financial industry.
Awesome. And we'll have all those links in our show notes. So thank you once again, Emily, for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
That's a wrap for this week's show. Visit our website, sharedsecurity.net, for previous episodes, links to our social media feeds, our YouTube channel, and to sign up for our email newsletter. First-time listener to the podcast? Please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And if you like this episode, please share it with friends and colleagues. Thanks for listening, and see you next week for another episode of the Shared Security Weekly Blaze.